Hi, everybody. Welcome to another exciting edition of Meditation Mastery. Today, I wanted to talk about something that seems to be a relevant theme. I don't know why, but as I'm teaching meditation in different places, the theme's kind of coming up through different groups that I'm teaching at. And that's kind of how I feel like my own practice and reflections are evolving, is that, I go into groups and I listen to them and I see what they're thinking, what they're going through, kind of collecting the themes that people are in and then kind of giving talks to address those. And then kind of, changing my own thoughts and working through my own processes in conjunction of what is it that people seem to be looking for, what do they want to know. And then I start to kind of understand meditation or, the mind from that perspective. So lately I've been hearing lots of things about people looking for the transitional points between meditation and daily life, how that works, how to kind of switch back and forth, or how meditation helps in the daily life. And the kind of driving wedge in all of that, I would say almost like the crystallized like point in all of that, that I've been coming to is something that I want to call equanimity. So the Buddha talked about equanimity. The word for that in Pali is upekkha. And the word for equanimity, it's kind of this feeling of, the Buddha described it, he said once to his son, so the Buddha actually had a son before he himself became a monk and became enlightened. And then his son became a monk and eventually became enlightened. It's kind of, he ordained his own son. And the instructions he gave him, he said, he gave him a meditation on the four elements. But he said to his son, whose name was Rahula, he said, Rahula, be like the earth. The earth receives all. People spit on the earth. People pour blood on the earth. People plant flowers on the earth. Whatever people give to the earth just receives it all equally. He said, Rahula, be like the water. People could pour dye or chemicals or things in the water, or poison into the water, right? Or people can give love in the water and free animals into the water and swim in the water. And the water receives all of that equally. He said, Rahula, be like the air. People burn things, right? They let out scents, but they also let, like incense, but also, garbage that we let out a lot of different smells into the air. A lot of different smokes and, substances are released into the air. But the air receives everything equally. He said, so be like the air. And he said, Rahula, be like fire. Fire burns all things, whether you put in wood, whether you're putting in, for our sake, we'll say like plastic, right? Whether you put in some chemicals or some, noxious things, or whether you're, putting in incense and flowers and sage and kind of doing things ceremoniously, right? That fire just, it accepts everything. It just burns. It just burns whatever you give it to burn, whatever fuel you give it, right? So it's like, so earth receives and kind of water just mixes with, air, it accumulates, fire just burns. That the four elements, they're just accepting. They accept whatever we give them, everything equally. And he said, Rahula, just in the same way should we practice. And, there was this monk who was walking with his clay bowl, and he was walking, for alms. And this one man walked by him, and he looked at him, and he spit in the monk's bowl. And he's like, stupid monk, get out of here. And he spits in his bowl. And the monk just, smiles and just keeps walking. And eventually the monk, and the man's kind of like waiting for the monk to react. And he sees that the monk sits down, and the monk picks up some dirt, and he kind of sprinkles the dirt into his bowl, and he mixes the dirt with the saliva that the man spit in his bowl, and he uses that as kind of this mud to fill a crack that had formed in his bowl. Yeah, and he used that to form a crack, and then he was kind of content, and then he continued on begging, and this man eventually was like impressed by that and went to like follow him and ask for teachings. But to start looking at how we can live life in a more balanced way, this comes with the teaching of impermanence, right? The non-dependability of this world, the fact that things end. Every day ends in like a sunset. Every, life ends in death. Every relationship has an ending, right? Our jobs, our careers, the locations we're living, everything actually has an end. The ending is something that all beginnings share, that everything that is here is right now in the middle of its lifespan. I think Eckhart Tolle said, what is life? Life is the dash between the birth date and the death date on a tombstone, right? It's that dash from here to here. That everything, as soon as you're born, as soon as something arises, as soon as it's created, it's heading towards an ending. And, when we're in the throes of life and we're in the middle of it, we don't realize that. We don't see it, right? The flower, it's fully bloomed. But then as we're getting older, right, as we're dying, or if we see people around us, there's loss, there's sickness, right? We're at funerals, we're in hospitals. We see, anytime I've ever gone to a hospital, I see that the hospital's full of people kind of in the sickness and in these end stages and in this place that I often forget in my normal life. In my normal life, it's all kind of go, go, go. And I'm listening to music and I'm eating and I'm having fun and I'm dancing. And, but you go to a hospital and you see that at all times, this hospital is full of people who are dying and who are sick, and that there's a whole nother side of reality, of the cycle of things that we're not always in touch with, And as things end, I've heard this from people that had cancer, right? It's like as soon as they have cancer, they start appreciating things, right? As soon as you're like leaving somewhere, you start really seeing it with new eyes. That endings also bring this gratitude and this appreciation and this openness and this reflective quality of, wow, life was so beautiful. And also a lot of times as people are passing away, they look back in their life and they say, my God, I should have lived things differently. All those days that I was lying in the couch watching TV, all those times that I was yelling at people and having fights and being worried and stressed, like those could have been days that I was just out and appreciating life and being fully alive. So also reflecting on death and ending and change, it allows us to really more fully be here in our lives and be appreciative of it. And this quality of upekkha, this quality of equanimity, of balance, being able to just be present with the situations, to not kind of go too fully in either direction, right? To not want too much that isn't here, to not be rejecting too much that is here, to realize that every time we get something, like someday we're also going to lose something, and every time we lose something, to know sometimes we're going to get something. When I was in India, this was actually, I got a tattoo, my first tattoo, and it's just 3 lines on my arm. And what was happening is that as I was traveling to India, I left the monastery, right? So I just ended this whole 10-year amazing, crazy, powerful chapter of my life. And I went to India and I disrobed, and this thing ended. And as this thing ended, something else was beginning. And it was like, who is Seth? What am I now? What am I going to do now? And I was in a place with some people, and then I left, and then I was in a new place with new people. I was traveling through India. So I kept jumping into all of these very immersive environments with these different communities and really being fully present. Wow, I'm here now with these people. And the next thing I know, I'm somewhere else with another group of people, and that's equally real and valid and important and meaningful. And this happened a few times, and I had my little ukulele with me as I was traveling, and I, made a song, and the song kind of was talking about how life keeps going, that everything is changing, that every hello is a goodbye, but every goodbye then is also a hello. And eventually, when I got these 3 lines, it's because in India, that Shiva is this god of destruction, right? That Shiva destroys things, that ends things. But if you look at kind of the greater cosmology, the Indians, they say like God, right, is God. But they have 3 gods. So the G, it's for Brahma, who's the generator, right? He creates things. O is for Vishnu, he's the overseer. And D is Shiva, he's the destroyer. So generator, overseer, destroyer, right? Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. And these are their 3 gods, but that's just an embodiment of this process of things arising, things being here, and things ending. But it's not like things arose, they're here, and then they're gone, and that's the end of the cycle. As soon as things are destroyed and disappear, they're being actually transformed and transmuted. If you watch, things falling and dying, then something uses those nutrients to grow. That the universe kind of has the big bang, and then it kind of collapses. Then it has a big bang, and it collapses. And the breath, in and out, and the heartbeat, and the waves, and the sun and the moon. That if there's anything that we can learn by looking at the universe, is that it's cyclical. That there's really nothing that begins or ends, truly. Because if you look deeply at anything's beginning, you can see that it comes from other things, right? For that flower to be there, the rain had to fall, something had to die to give that soil nutrients. That there's all these different things that had to feed into that flower seed for it to grow. And then also after that flower dies, it again becomes the earth, which will become like mold or becomes more grass, or that water becomes part of the earth again and gets evaporated. So if you look closely at anything, there is no real beginning point and an end point. That it's all these different kind of conditions that came together that form this thing, and that thing again becomes all these conditions. That the universe is like this big web, right? It's all woven together. all these pieces making up one thing. Everything's kind of moving. It's like a traffic jam, right? That there's all these people that came from all these different places and they all converge. And this thing that's called a traffic jam that's moving, and then eventually it splits again and everyone goes off and goes home, right? That it's this converging and this breaking apart and this converging and this breaking apart. And that realization that every ending is also a beginning. That's why I got those 3 lines for Shiva the Destroyer. It was to remind myself for the rest of my life, because that is what life is going to be, is that at the end of life, there's an ending. But to remember that, even then, right, leaving the monastery was an ending, leaving each place in India was an ending. But every ending just opens the door for the next thing. So just to remind myself that even at the end of this life, there's going to be the next thing. I don't know what that is, but if I just watch the universal principle of cycles and that flow of things ending to begin and ending to begin, how can I be any other way? How can this consciousness, this mind be any other way? That, yeah, maybe this body dies, but the body also then becomes the grass and the earth and things, and the consciousness has to become something else too, right? So that understanding that everything is flowing, that everything is just in a state of change and transition. What we need to practice within all of that is that understanding, to see that clearly. But it allows us to start practicing equanimity in terms of like, our feathers don't get too ruffled. And in Buddhism, they talk about like, gain and loss, pleasure and pain, fame and disrepute, that there's these different things that come in that sometimes, if you get famous, right, if everyone's like talking about you, you're all the way up here. But then if you've done something bad and everyone's talking bad about you, you're like low. When you've gotten a gain, you feel amazing. But when you've lost something, you feel terrible. And that our emotional states and our mental states kind of ping pong, back and forth between the conditions, how we're doing, if we feel good, if there's pleasure, right? If there's pleasure, we're like, whoa. If there's pain, we're, oh man, that whatever's going on, our mind is kind of riding those waves and we're getting thrown back and forth, back and forth. And what the Buddha said is, try to just remain equal, be like the earth, if something bad comes in, just receive it. If something good comes in, receives it, fire just burns through whatever's there. Okay, whatever's here, that's what's here, that's okay. That we can use like the elements, right? These 4 elements to just reflect on the way of being, this way of being neutral, receptive, open, without big preference, that ultimately, of course, we're trying to be happy, and of course we want our lives to look a certain way and we want to gain certain things. But that leads to a lot of grasping, it leads to a lot of attachment, it leads to, again, us riding these waves of highs and lows. Whereas if we can, of course, we're always moving towards happiness, that's the goal, right? We want that, and peace and freedom. But sometimes we have to see that, we're never going to be able to keep all those things that we want to keep, to keep the bank account, to keep the relationship, to keep the position at work, to keep our health, to keep, all these things we want to keep that make us feel good. And there's times in our life where we're riding high, right? We have everything we need, but then one of those things changes, right? And sometimes we're at the low point where literally every one of those things is falling apart. Like, I have no money, my relationship's falling apart, I don't know where I'm going to live, I don't know what I'm doing, right? I feel lost, I feel broken, right? That we all have these like bottoms, we all have these tops, and they kind of flow in and out. And of course, we want to be on top. Of course, it feels good, and we work towards that. And, we should. But simultaneously, we need to have a certain kind of surrender, a certain kind of abandon with all of that. That we have to also, at any moment, if something amazing happens, be like, wow, that's amazing, great, thank you so much. And if something, bad or horrible or painful or a loss happens, we have to say, wow, that's terrible. And also, like, I understand that, and that's to be expected in this place. That we have to start changing our relationships to it. And I found a couple times, like when I've given these talks, and I'll give an amazing talk for like a half an hour or 40 minutes, and I feel like, wow, that was a great talk. And I'd go to listen to it and something didn't work and it wasn't recorded or the sound didn't work. I can see how good my practice is by, how I'm reacting. Like, am I getting upset at the phone? Or do I just kind of laugh and say, wow, okay, So that feeling of upekkha, how do we find more of that balance? And this is kind of like a theme that I've been going into for, I would say, like the past few weeks even. But specifically that understanding of how to find a way to remain in the middle with whatever's happening, how to be present, how to kind of drive myself into this present moment enough that I can really just be with things. And, if you're really deep in the present moment, then the stories don't really bother you that much. right? That like if you're in the middle of a difficult process in your life, you know, a lot of people tell me like I'm in these deep transition processes, and it's like, okay, but also try to just be present, because right here in the moment, nothing's really happening. This moment's fine. That if I can just drop in very basically to this moment, I actually feel pretty rested. That's why meditation helps. But you know, if you go into the stories, that's when everything's all crazy. But if you can drop into this moment, you're okay. Simultaneously, there will be times where this moment is really painful and really difficult. You know, I had like a really bad headache yesterday, and I felt like my eye was like throbbing, and it was like a nerve, something, you know, I slept on it weird or something, right? So it was like the present moment was really painful, and I was practicing, okay, just be here with it, just be here with it. But then my mom's like, do you want Tylenol? And I was like, yeah, actually I do, you know? So also you can take things to make yourself feel better. And simultaneously, you know, I reflected on the bigger picture that said, I'm not always going to have this pain in my head, that I'll feel better than, and I feel great today, you know, that it will pass. So sometimes looking at the story, looking at the bigger picture actually allows us to feel more peaceful, more balanced, right? More equanimous. I don't know if it's equanimous or equanimous. I think it's equanimous, right? Feel more equanimous, or we can drive ourselves more into the present moment to feel more equanimous, right? Or, you know, if we have like a great loss, we can then focus on the gratefulness of things, right? When I've lost somebody important in my life, I feel how thankful I am that I had them, that gratefulness fills the place that loss, you know, the hole that loss made, you can fill it with gratefulness, right? That in each moment with what's happening, there's a way to kind of shift our perception, shift our relationship to the moment to keep ourselves in a bit of a balance, right? And again, it could be more about focusing on just being here. It can be more about looking at the bigger picture. It can be more about arising specific emotions. The Buddha said, you know, if somebody comes at you and they say like nasty words, he said, well, then you can reflect, at least they didn't hit me, you know. And he said it would be like as if somebody walked over to water, and there was like kind of like scum on the top of the water, you know, like pond scum, like green algae. And he said, you brush the algae away, and then you can kind of drink that fresh water underneath it. He said, see it like that. If somebody says words to you that are not nice, you can say, well, at least they didn't hit me, you know. And if somebody, you know, does hit you, then you could, you know, same thing, like reflect, well, at least they didn't kill me, right? At least it could have been worse. Or that there's all these little tricks and tips that you can play with your mind in different situations to look at it in new ways. And whatever works for you, right? This was like the Buddhist tips. I'm giving you some of my own. But for yourself, you know, really just looking at each moment, at each situation, and seeing how can I bring myself back into kind of like a middle space, right? Whatever comes my way, how do I navigate that I can stay more or less in the middle, right? How can I understand the things that are happening to me, shift my perception, right? Whether becoming thankful for what we're receiving, whether we sit here and we try to understand it deeply, right? Sometimes something will happen and I just say, that's my karma. You know, it's just like an easy way to accept something, right? That like, you know, I hit my head or something happens, and, you know, other people might make a whole story about it. And I just say, yeah, it's my karma for whatever reason that happened to me. And that's just one way that I can accept things that happen, right? Other ways, if something's ending or changing or shifting, you could say, well, maybe this is the universe ending something because it's time for something else to come in, right? That I'm changing my way of looking at that, right? That the universe is actually doing something for me. Even though it's sad, I have no idea about the bigger picture. Maybe this has to happen now for something down the line, right? If I lose somebody, if somebody dies, well, maybe that person has to go on, right? That person has a journey that's not just me, right? Like that person has their own journey, and maybe they're supposed to be going somewhere else now for their greatest good. That there's different ways to look at and think about situations, and to find that way to like I often talk about the mind being like a non-stick pan. So it's like finding ways to be fully present with the situation, but also to adjust in a way that things can kind of slide off, or you feel things, and sometimes all we can do is be patient. Sometimes all we can do is be in a situation that's difficult and just be patient with it, to breathe and say, this is really difficult and this is really hard right now. You know, astrology talks about that. They say like a planet will come through and it's like a heavy energy. So you're going to feel this heaviness kind of growing and growing and growing. And all you can do is just kind of let the weight of that, it cooks you, you know, you're just sitting there and you're processing and going through something really difficult, but you can only really just wait. And as that process, you know, that planet passes, suddenly you can, oh, okay, I'm free again. Yeah, that there are some times we're just being patient and saying, this is painful now, and I can only sit and breathe and feel it and wait it out. And that's like building a muscle too, right? The muscle of forbearance, the muscle of understanding of time, that impermanence can be used in our favor. Often we think about impermanence or change as like a way to remember that like our happiness is going to leave us, right? Or things we like are all going to leave us someday. But it's also the other way. It's like if there's something that's really difficult, if I'm like right now in a situation that feels unpleasant, if it feels uncomfortable, if I'm like in the office and there's fighting, right? Or if there's like an awkward situation somewhere, right? Or something like with your family, right? And there's like this moment and there's this awkward situation, and usually we kind of react and we try to get out of it. And but sometimes you could just sit there and say, oh, this is really unpleasant, and you breathe. But you also know, like, as soon as the situation passes, right? As soon as that heaviness passes, that planet goes by, as soon as things shift, like your feeling will shift again. And you're like, okay, no, I'm actually fine. How much can I be here again? Or how much am I traumatized from what I've been through? And that's something that we have to also notice is like a lot of the trauma, it's because something really hard or heavy passed and it kind of cracked us, right? That it left like an indelible mark, like we're imprinted from this thing. And, even though, I got yelled at when I was 5 years old, I still carry that trauma in me, that there's still something in me that feels that's afraid of that was unfair and it's not okay. And I've shut off a part of my heart because of it. We have to really look at those places in ourselves. In which ways am I stuck in the past, right? In which ways am I stuck in the future? In which ways am I grasping onto control, wanting things to be a certain way, not accepting how things were, wanting to try to create the things, later? How can I find that way to slowly see, reclaim my energy, reclaim my mind, reclaim my power from my past, and simultaneously to kind of reclaim that from the future too, to reclaim my energy, to be fully here and to build our future in a way that's compelling, that feels good, that's not filled with like worry and fear. And, the present moment, it's the place where it all happens. The future is created by the present, and the present was created by the past. So if you look deeply in this moment, you can see the past, because everything that's ever happened has created this. And if you look deeply in this moment, you're going to see the future, because all of that is grown from here. So my question to you would be, what kind of future do you want to have? If you want to have a peaceful, happy future, then start planting the seeds for peace and happiness now. Start relating and reacting to this place, to this moment with peace and happiness. Start dealing with your past in a way that it can be processed and released, right? If we're clinging to our future with fear, right, and worry and anxiety and stress and tension, those are the seeds we're planting, and that's what we're going to get. We're going to create more of that because that's the energy we're feeding into it, right? So it's really important to say, what energy am I feeding into this moment? What is my mindset? What is my goal? What is my focus? What is my direction? Yeah, how do I want to relate to all of this? And if you can relate to all of this properly, you're going to both resolve the past and create the future while being fully present and happy and peaceful here, right? To the best of your ability, staying in that middle place. So I really like this reflection that we did on the elements, reflecting on the earth and fire and water. For the meditation today, I'm going to actually lead you through the elements within the body to see that in the self, to really start to process that on a more visceral level. This is a cool meditation to do more than once. So if you want to do this a few days in a row, to really just start changing up that perspective, start feeling and seeing things differently, it really helps. But also just to reflect throughout the day, throughout your life, when things are happening to you, when you're in the middle of difficult situations. Here in Boston, it's like we just had that, turn back the clocks. So it's just, when I wake up in the morning now, it's light out instead of dark, right? That we're slowly moving now into the summer, into the warmth, into the light. And, in the winter here, it's so heavy and it's dark and there's snow and everything's dead and it lasts forever. And this whole thing, like, you can only just be patient and wait out the season and just use it as a time of rest, but then the same thing, like, it's just happened that it's starting to shift, and there's something in me that's like, it's true. Things do change. If you wait, there is a shift, right? So even just reflecting on nature and just seeing how things are, it can teach you emotionally. It can teach your perceptions to kind of change in a way that makes life easier to manage, easier to handle, easier to bear. And that's really your work, right? That's your practice, is to look for yourself. Which situations am I not handling skillfully? Which situations am I holding too tightly onto? In which ways can I maybe release things, let go of things, shift my relationship to things so that they can kind of flow and that I'm not such a stress ball, right? And I can say for myself, I've gone through a lot of really difficult things in the past few years, but I can see how the practice helps. And there's times that I'm lost. There's times that I'm angry. There's times that I'm crying. There's times that these emotions come up and out, and that's okay. But also really letting things process and move through. They did a study with Tibetan monks, and like they had a group of Tibetan monks and a group of normal people, right? Non-meditators. And they said, we're going to give you an electric shock. And they put something like on their finger. And I said, okay, we're going to give you a shock in like a minute. And the Tibetan monks are like, okay. And they just like wait. And then there's a shock and they go, oh, and then it's over. And then they said, the non-meditators are, okay, we're going to give you a shock. And they're like, can you give me a shock? Okay. And they're like, ee! And then it shocked them like, ow, and then it, that when they measured their kind of blood pressure and even their brain activity and everything, they saw that the Tibetan monks, they just stay very relaxed until the actual shock happens, and then it's like boom, and then there's this big spike, and then it drops back down because they're kind of just in the moment, and then when the thing happens, they react to it. But then as soon as that thing is gone, they're back to like this normal resting state. Whereas the average person, when we know something's happening, we already start building up our stress and our intensity and our worry and all this stuff, and then the thing happens, and then we're kind of still in the place like, oh my God, that thing happened, that was so unpleasant, that for the Tibetan monk, there's this peace, and then the thing happens, then there's peace. And for us, it's like as soon as we know there's something coming, we're already unhappy, we're already stressed, and then the thing happens, and then we're stressed more, and then we're stressed more. So it takes us a while to get back to like our resting state. So, if you take that as like a day, and something's going to happen at lunchtime, that means the Tibetan monk, they're going to be at peace all day long, and just at lunch there's something, and then they're at peace again. Whereas the average person, the entire day will just be like a stress pyramid, right? They'll just be stressed all day, and the thing happens, and the rest of the day it's like de-escalation, right? So it's like you've wasted, 23 hours of your life because 1 hour was going to be unpleasant. Whereas the Tibetan monk, they've really had a great 23 hours, and just that 1 hour was, bad, and then they had a great next, So it's kind of like, how do you want to use your mind? The inevitable things are going to happen. So how do you want to relate to those things? How much do you want to let that ruin your day? How much do you want to let that kind of change your mindset, keep you in an unhappy, difficult place? Versus how much can you really take control of that and say, well, I'm going to enjoy and do the best and, put things in their place, really reclaim our minds, say like, you're not going to drag me into that stuff all day. I'll deal with that when it's time to deal with that. And then I'm going to be done with that when it's time to be done with it. And that's really up to us to feel and to see. And again, just this practice of dropping into the present moment, that not being so stuck in the stories of what's going to happen, but really try just to be here. And even if something's going to happen later, it's like, well, it's not here right now, so might as well just be here now and keep doing what I'm doing. And honestly, whenever that thing happens, it's going to be different than I think it is. It's like when I go to the dentist, I'm like nervous all day and I go, and it's kind of unpleasant, but it wasn't that bad. It wasn't as bad as I was making it out to be, So it's like we tell these stories, we project, right? This fear, we're projecting worst case situation. And then the thing happens and it's just that bad. Or even if it is a bad dentist appointment and they have to drill something, it's that pain, but that's it. It's literally like 5-10 seconds of pain and then it's gone, but yet I'm suffering for, 8 hours knowing that it's coming. Right. So it's kind of just finding a way to find like a healthier relationship to that stuff, to not be stressing things that aren't actually happening right now, to, of course, use your time to reflect. I found praying really helps, that if there's something that's coming, instead of worrying, try praying, sending it light or love or good energy, or asking for the Buddha or whoever to come and help and support you, or, that you can actually send positivity into something that you're worried about. And that's a nice way for kind of encasing it in a positive energy, right? Versus encasing it in an energy of worry and stress. So there's different little tools and techniques you can use, and that's for you to figure out yourself. But really to work on reclaiming your mind with this practice of equanimity, right? So we'll go into that now in the meditation, and thanks for listening.